Let's get started then on this topic of suicide and suicidal thoughts. Not one of the enjoyable things to talk about, but most things in mental health are not that enjoyable to talk about. I want to begin by saying that if you are someone who has ever wanted to die, you're certainly not alone in that. If you look at statistics, this is from America, according to the CDC, which is a government health organization there. They say that in the year 2020, nearly 46,000 people died by suicide. That's about one death by suicide every 11 minutes in the country. About 12.2 million people seriously thought about suicide. And this is in America, remember, where people often have things better off financially and health-wise and things like that than people in South Africa do on an average level. In 2020, they say that suicide was among the top 9 leading causes of death for people from age 10 through 64, and it was the second leading cause of death for people ages 10 to 14, as well as 25 to 34. And in South Africa, according to this article in the Mail and Guardian from 2021, they said that the South African Depression and Anxiety Group reports that there are 23 known cases of suicide in South Africa every day. And for every person that commits suicide, 10 have attempted it. And it got much worse with COVID-19. They said the rate of calls to that organization increased by nearly 40% as of September 2021. There was a survey done by this organization called Over to You, and they said that in their sample, among the people that they surveyed, they said 10% of those people said that they had suicidal thoughts, and significantly more for those that had to shut down their businesses or had been retrenched in South Africa due to all the things going on with COVID and those sorts of things. And in South Africa as well, they found, another study has found that students, especially university students, have a much higher rate of thoughts of suicide than other groups. They found that 30.6% of students had thoughts of suicide in the past 12 months. Now, this is back in 2020 as well. And 16.6% had made a suicide plan, and 2.4% had attempted suicide. And they say that's higher than other groups in the general population of South Africa, and also higher than those that are typically found among students in other parts of the world. So we are having a problem with it. It's been a problem, I think, for probably it's always been a problem, but at certain times it's a bigger problem than others. And I want us to see that even among righteous people, we can see sometimes the desire to die. Now, that's not exactly necessarily suicidal thoughts, but this desire to die has been present even with righteous people. Now, the one I'm going to start with, I don't know if we want to call him righteous exactly, but he was a prophet of God, Jonah. And he got angry because God did not destroy the city of Nineveh. And so he was upset that God is gracious and merciful. And in verse 3, he said, "Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live." Then the Lord said, "Is it right for you to be angry?" So here he was suicidal, or not really suicidal, but he was asking God to take his life. because he was angry. Then we find in chapter 4 in verses 8 through 9 where it says, "And it happened when the sun arose that God prepared a vehement east wind, and the sun beat on Jonah's head so that he grew faint. Then he wished death for himself and said, 'It is better for me to die than to live.' Then God said to Jonah, 'Is it right for you to be angry about the plant?' And he said, 'It is right for me to be angry, even to death.'" So now he's angry, but it's accompanied by this physical discomfort, very much physical discomfort. And so he's again wishing to die. And God is making the point to him that really he doesn't have a reason to be feeling this way. But he did feel this way. He felt like it would be good for him to die. Well, of course, Jonah was not really being righteous in his attitude here. But there are other people. In Numbers chapter 11, we see Moses. In verses 14 through 15, he tells God, "I am not able to bear all these people alone because the burden is too heavy for me. If you treat me like this, please kill me here and now, if I have found favor in your sight, and do not let me see my wretchedness." You know, he looked at the task ahead of him. He viewed it as something he was going to fail in. He was going to be miserable trying to do this. And he said, "Look, if I have found favor in your sight, just kill me, rather than leave me to this burden that I cannot handle." And so he had the stress, extreme stress here in his situation. He didn't seem to have much hope for it getting better at this point, even though it certainly did. And so he's asking God to take his life. But God didn't do that because that's not what he needed. In 1 Kings 19, in verse 4, we find the prophet Elijah, where he's running away from Jezebel and her threat to kill him. And it says, "But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree, and he prayed that he might die, and said, 'It is enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers.'" He felt like a failure. He felt down, depressed. You know, we've talked about this when we talked about depression, I believe. But he wants to die here. And he's asking God to take his life. In the book of Job, of course, Job was suffering more than any of the others, as far as I can tell. But when he's talking about this, he's starting his speech in verse 20 through 23 of chapter 3. He says, "Why is light given to him who is in misery, and life to the bitter of soul, who long for death, but it does not come, and search for it more than hidden treasures, who rejoice exceedingly, and are glad when they can find the grave? Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, and whom God has hedged in?" He felt like God was oppressing him. And so he's longing for death, but it won't come. And he's saying, why? Why do I have to live? Why can I not just enjoy death? You know, I would be glad to find the grave at this point. And one thing I want us to really notice about this is while they longed for death, while they wanted to die at that point, God didn't give them death, and everything turned out much better later for them. But also, they did not seek to end their own lives. They asked God to take their lives. That's what we see with the righteous. Even when they wanted to die, they were not thinking about killing themselves. They were asking God to take their life because they knew that is the proper way to do it. It is not proper to make that decision ourselves. We do see some cases of suicide, people killing themselves or trying to, in the Bible, but we only see this among the unrighteous or the ignorant. In 1 Samuel 26, this is not an example here, but this is connected to one of the examples. And he says here, when David's men are trying to get him to kill King Saul, he has an opportunity. They tell him, this is, God is giving you the chance. You can kill him and finish this problem where Saul is trying to kill you. But it says in verse 9 through 11, but David said to Abishai, do not destroy him, for who can stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? David said furthermore, as the Lord lives, the Lord shall strike him, or his day shall come to die, or he shall go out to battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. But please take now the spear and jug of water that are by his head, and let us go. And so they made a point to King Saul that they could have killed him, but did not. But he says the way to handle this is to allow the Lord to deal with it. Either the Lord will just strike him dead, or he'll get old and his day is going to come when he's going to die one day, or he'll die in battle. Now, as it turns out, that none of that exactly happened to King Saul. In 1 Samuel 31, verse 4, it says, then Saul said to his armor bearer, so he's been wounded by the Philistines. He's in battle, but he's been wounded badly. And he says in verse 4, then Saul said to his armor bearer, draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised men come and thrust me through and abuse me. He's afraid of being tortured. But his armor bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell on it. So Saul killed himself. He didn't die in battle. He killed himself. Yes, he was wounded in battle, probably fatally, but he didn't let it carry out to where he died from that. He killed himself. In 2 Samuel chapter 1, when David receives the news of Saul's death, and Jonathan also died in the battle, in verse 5, it says, so David said to the young man who told him, how do you know that Saul and Jonathan his son are dead? Then the young man who told him said, as I happened by chance to be on Mount Gilboa, there was Saul leaning on his spear, and indeed the chariots and horsemen followed hard after him. Now when he looked behind him, he saw me and called to me, and I answered, here I am. And he said to me, who are you? So I answered him, I am an Amalekite. And he said to me again, please stand over me and kill me, for anguish has come upon me, but my life still remains in me. So I stood over him and killed him, because I was sure that he could not live after he had fallen. And I took the crown that was on his head and the bracelet that was on his arm, and have brought them here to my Lord. Now, this man was lying. This was not true. Saul killed himself, but according to the story, and this is how the judgment is going to go, Saul was fatally wounded. He was going to die, but he was in pain, and so he asked this man to kill him, to take him out of this pain. All right. Well, if you go down to 2 Samuel 1, verse 14 through 16, it says, so David said to him, how was it that you were not afraid to put forth your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? Then David called one of the young men and said, go near and execute him. And he struck him so that he died. So David said to him, your blood is on your own head, for your own mouth has testified against you, saying, I have killed the Lord's anointed. The idea of assisted suicide, if Saul was asking him to kill him, to put him out of his misery, David still says that was murder. That was not okay. You were not allowed to kill him. That's not how it works. And he executed the man because of it. Even though it was a lie, but he was judged based on that lie. In Judges chapter 9, we see a man named Abimelech who was very evil, had murdered his brothers and become king in Israel. This is actually before the time of the kings, but he set himself up as a king during the time of the judges. In Judges chapter 9, verses 53 through 54, when he was fighting against some of these people that had turned against him, it says, "But a certain woman dropped an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. Then he called quickly to the young man, his armor-bearer, and said to him, 'Draw your sword and kill me, lest men say of me, a woman killed him.' So his young man thrust him through, and he died." So here's another case of what's called assisted suicide. He's already dying, but his pride is there where he wants to be in control. He doesn't want to be killed by a woman. He'd rather his own man killed him. And yet he was a very wicked man. This is not the kind of thing that righteous people did that we ever see. In 2 Samuel 17, verse 23, we see Ahithophel, who was David's advisor, who rebelled against him and supported Absalom. And Absalom was taking Ahithophel's advice, but then he was advised differently by someone loyal to David and did not take Ahithophel's advice on something that was very important. And so in verse 23 of 2 Samuel 17, it says, "Now when Ahithophel saw that his advice was not followed, he saddled a donkey and arose and came home to his house, to his city. Then he put his household in order and hanged himself and died. And he was buried in his father's tomb." Now, this is not just he's upset that they didn't listen to his counsel. He knew that they were going to fail and he was going to be executed as a traitor. That's not an excuse, though. But he is sort of the Old Testament representation of Judas. As he betrayed David, Judas betrayed Jesus. And Judas did exactly the same thing. In Matthew 27, verse 3 through 5, it says, "Then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that he had been condemned, was remorseful and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, 'I have sinned by betraying innocent blood.' And they said, 'What is that to us? You see to it.' Then he threw down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed and went and hanged himself." This is really sad. He went to the wrong people, didn't he? He didn't go to the right people to say, "I have sinned." These people didn't care about his sin. They didn't care about him. And they just dismissed him, and he went off and hanged himself. If he had gone to the other apostles, I don't know what they would have said at that time, but he didn't even give it time. He just went and killed himself. And we don't see there being any kind of good thing for him or anyone else that came out of that. We do see this man who we wouldn't say is particularly evil, but he was ignorant. In Acts chapter 16, in verse 27 through 29, when there was the earthquake, when Paul and Silas were in prison and all the doors were opened, in verse 27, "And the keeper of the prison, awaking from sleep and seeing the prison doors open, supposing the prisoners had fled, drew his sword and was about to kill himself. But Paul called with a loud voice, saying, 'Do yourself no harm, for we are all here.' Then he called for a light, ran in, and fell down trembling before Paul and Silas." And we know he asked, "What must I do to be saved?" And he ended up becoming a Christian along with his household. But here he was in his ignorance. He didn't know what he should do, but he knew his life was going to be taken if the prisoners escaped, and he decided to just kill himself. But thankfully he was stopped from doing that and even learned about something that gave him much more hope in life, which is the gospel of Christ. Something that I want us to see, we're not going to go through everything tonight, but I want us to look at this particular idea. And you might disagree with me about this passage, but I believe when we look at the story of Job, his wife was essentially advising him to commit suicide. In Job chapter 2, in verse 9 through 10, it says, "Then his wife said to him, 'Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die.' But he said to her, 'You speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity?' In all this, Job did not sin with his lips." His wife saw him in incredible distress, in having lost everything, their children, their finances, other people they loved, their servants, just they were in misery. And she says, "How can you just hold fast to your integrity? How can you continue to live? Just curse God and die." I believe she's basically saying, don't just keep being faithful to God. Kill yourself, die, get out of this this misery. And he says that's foolishness. That's what a foolish woman would say. He says, shall we accept good from God and not accept adversity? All this trouble. If we decide to kill ourselves because of the trouble that we're going through, we are cursing God, essentially. We are saying, no, the things that are happening in my life that God is allowing to happen, that God has determined may be good for us, right? We're not going to accept it. We're just going to try to get out of it by killing ourselves. And that is evil. That is sinful. It is cursing God. And so next time, I want to look at some false ideas regarding suicide and how we should think about that. But the rationality behind it, why people think that they should kill themselves, that's what I want to talk about next time. But for tonight, let's think about this idea that the righteous, even when they want to die, it's not wrong sometimes to want to die, but it is wrong to think of killing yourself. The righteous asked God to take their lives. And when God did not take their lives, they did not curse him and die anyway. They continued to be faithful, and it ended up being much better for them in the end. The suffering they were going through, the stress they were going through did not last forever. Let's try to remember that and not become as one of the foolish people. Thank you.